Hey, everybody. Welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Charles Szczepanek. Great to see you. Many of you here. Rhodesy, welcome, Rhodesy. Kale, good to see you again. Rob, Alexis, we haven't seen you, Alexis, in a few weeks. I hope we have a chance to talk about Mendelssohn. Nancy, hello, Nancy. And C Drive, David, Bedlington Groomer, welcome. Quentin, welcome, Quentin. And Bethany and Antonio. Good to see everybody. How's everybody doing? We have two submissions for to take a listen to today. So if you read the description, we're going to be listening to some Chopin by Quentin, and we're also going to listen to Bethany play one of my arrangements. Very excited to dive into both of those. Also, if you saw in the pre-roll, I have a new album coming out on Friday. There's a pre-save link in the description below. So if you like that music, if you like what you heard, please consider pre-saving. That would be great. All right. Well, wonderful. Why don't we dive right in? Quentin is playing Chopin's fourth Prelude. Very famous. Very, very famous. And yeah, let me just get that queued up and we'll get rolling. All right, lovely stuff, Quentin. Lovely. Let's give Quentin a round of applause in the chat, can we? Really, really lovely playing. Quentin, we've heard you play a couple times before, or at least once before. Can you remind us how long you have been studying piano and how long have you been working on this piece in particular? And Bethany, I'll echo Bethany's comment. Bethany said, beautiful singing tone, like your dynamic variation and expressiveness. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's give Quentin just a second to respond. And then we will dive in. Hopefully soon. Quentin, playing the piano for 25 years. Wonderful. That's awesome. Very, very cool. And Quentin, how long have you been working on this particular piece? You may have said in your email to me, I cannot remember. I know that you talked about a couple other pieces of repertoire you were working on, but 2 months. Great, great, Quentin. Do we have anybody else here, by the way, that is working on this prelude or has worked on this one in the past? Probably most, by the time you get to the point where you can tackle this, I think most pianists will play it. So, yeah, has anybody else here studied this piece? All right, Quentin. Thanks, Nancy, for the applause. Thanks. Alexis, yes, you worked on this piece. Great. Okay. The beautiful thing about this particular prelude, David says a long time ago, the beautiful thing about this prelude is there really almost isn't a point where we can finish working on it. It's technically, there are difficulties. It's relatively simple technically compared to a lot of other Chopin's writing, right? But the interpretation and the execution of those couple things, like the softness of all of those left-hand chords, the perfect shaping of melody, those are things we can spend a really long time working on. We can always come back and revisit a piece like this. So if you have played it in the past and you haven't pulled out the music lately, you might consider doing that, especially if it's been a couple years or a decade. You might revisit it and see what's changed since the last time you played it. Okay. Okay, Quentin. First thing I'd like to mention, and thanks for putting the putting your score on the screen for us as you went along. I'm not sure where you pulled that from, but let's talk about these little notes right here. On the score that you showed us, they were written as appoggiaturas. Sorry, they were written as acciacchaturas, not appoggiaturas. And the difference is that the acciaccatura has a slash through it, right? The appoggiatura does not. There's also a difference in the execution of those. And Quentin, you'll find that most pianists, I can only think of one that plays it like a typical grace note, and that is Rubinstein. Everybody else plays this as an appoggiatura, which means that the grace note, the B, gets emphasis and gets played with the left hand there. And then the subsequent note, the large note, gets less emphasis and is played later. So we would lean on the beat, and the B is struck with the left hand. Because Rubinstein is in such a minority, being the only pianist I can find, and there's also stuff, there's other stuff, if you watch my videos around the channel, Rubinstein's playing of Chopin in particular that doesn't follow the text scores that we now have available, that were made available after Rubinstein made all kinds of recordings. David, that's a great question. David said, is there a reason for writing it that way instead of just 2/8 notes? Yes, because we can have more interpretive choice. If it was just 2/8 notes, we'd have, and they'd be rhythmic like that, right? But it's not. So because it's written as an appoggiatura followed by our main note, it gives the correct note emphasis in the notation, which would be the B. And we also have a choice about how long we make the appoggiatura. Some pianists will make it almost as long as an eighth note or as long as an eighth note. One of the 2 times it happens, we have 2 instances of this where the phrase repeats, right? And the 2 times will be different. One time the appoggiatura might be longer, and another time it might be much shorter. We also have the option of playing much more quickly if you'd like to. And that might depend on which part of the piece we're in, like we just said. So if we're looking at the first one, put the score back up. Okay, if we're looking at this first one, end of measure 11. Don't mind the rest of my notes yet, Quentin. Because of the movement in measure 12 and where we're going in measure 12, we might choose, for interpretive reasons, to play a quicker appoggiatura in 11. But looking down the page, I'll put this in blue so you can see it quickly. The second time this happens, it is followed by a very different kind of bar, one that's more resolved. We might choose to play that one more slowly. Yes. David, great question. Okay. Quentin, let's go on to the next thing. So first thing, that's a notation thing. You played it correctly according to your score. What I'm showing you today is the Polish National Edition. So I very much trust it for Chopin. So I think we should lean into playing it as an appoggiatura, not an acciaccatura. Yes, David, yes. Okay. Next thing. Quentin, your left hand, you're doing very well. You're doing very well with your left hand. For most of the piece, it seems like it's nicely under control. We might be able to add a little bit more control to that if we add some extra structure in the wrist. I like what you're doing, and I like the freedom that you're showing, because as you drop into each of these, I'm seeing a nice wrist drop. Yes? The wrist is falling and is kind of pulling the fingers in the hand down. That's good. We don't want to lose that. But can we add to it a little bit more structure, meaning the wrist won't flex quite as much? So it might even look like when you see me do this, it's almost not flexing at all. Flexing being this motion, right? Or when we play, how it depresses like that. So we can gain a little bit more control, because sometimes we don't have a great grasp about how much energy we're losing when we strike the key, when we hit the key bottom, or when the hammer hits the string, when there's more flex. And because we have to repeat this technique every eighth note in this piece, and we have to have so much control, I would choose to sacrifice a little bit of that flex in place of more, so I'm calling it structure. It's really allowing the wrist less movement, because with less movement, we can more accurately predict the energy that we're going to put into the key. We're still trying to play with weight and not so much with finger articulation. So that's great. Don't lose that. Just see if we can minimize this into something smaller. Because now you can see as I'm playing this, I wouldn't call it exactly easy to keep everything so soft. But all of the notes are speaking, right? And they're all staying the same dynamic. I don't have anything that's going popping out of the texture. Of course, that was an exaggeration, right? Okay. Yeah, so give that, yeah, Quentin, you said you'll try that. Give it a try. And we might be able to add in just a little bit extra control there. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about technique for the last two measures when we get there, but let's dive into something different, and let's talk a little bit about interpretation for the piece. Okay. One of the most difficult things about playing this is that we have many notes and many phrases that continually repeat. The most obvious is the opening theme. We have this descending second. Well, it happens there, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. right? And then the notes change, but the motif stays. We have descending seconds. Same notes again, right? Because of all of that, we want to be careful that we don't play, if possible, we don't play any of those descending seconds the same way throughout the piece. At least not the same way within a single phrase. Maybe when things come back, we can revisit an idea. So how can we accomplish some of that? Can we have maybe a little bit of a bigger overarching plan that, let's start just with dynamic. What is the dynamic for the first, I'm going to call all of these sighs. And good morning, OCD King. What's the dynamic for the first one? Is the second one bigger or smaller than the first one? And then the third, is it bigger or smaller than the second and than the first? Can they all be different? Right? We probably don't want to make all of them softer each time. That wouldn't be a great choice because we still need to keep the opening line piano. And if we try to make each one of these less and less and less, we're going to run out of dynamic far too quickly, right? So the way I might interpret this, or the way I'm feeling it today, and this could change for me tomorrow, for you tomorrow. I'm feeling the opening melody be a little bit louder than piano, maybe mezzo piano-ish. And then going to the first sigh, where that gets slightly bigger than where we started. And then a little less. That was a lot less. Which means, as I respond to my playing, if I was to do that, big one first, very small second, and then somewhere in the middle for the third iteration of it. Just making sure that each one of these, that could be very successful. You can rearrange those dynamics. It could be successful. We just want to be sure that we don't have the same phrase played 3 times in a row, right? We have a little bit of aid if we can pay attention to the color of the chords underneath. How does this make us feel differently than, right? Okay. Yeah, Quentin, great. So those two things. You can map the melody by itself. And I might even do that. Can you make the melody sound successful without any of the harmony present? Can we make it sound interesting? With only 2 notes, really? Can we keep that interest? And can we create those really beautiful phrases? Then, can we add to that, paying attention to the color of all those different harmonies and see how those inflect the melody and where we'd like to go? Is the tension in bar 1 less, the same, or greater than the tension from bar 3 into bar 4? I'm not showing those on screen, but we can hear the difference, right? Okay. Next thing was about your rubato. I noticed that you did a lot of similar movement of tempo in the phrases. And I think it's an easy thing to fall into in this piece because we'll get beyond the first phrase soon. We can easily feel a hesitation on the upper note that falls into the next one, then speeds up. Hesitation, falling, speeding up. Same thing, hesitation, falling, speeding up. If we do that, if we use that mechanism of rubato too often, it's going to lose how special it was the first time, maybe the second time. So try to be careful about where you choose to use that. It's a good tool, and it's very expressive, right? But it can retain that power of expressiveness if we use it with a little more moderation. So sometimes maybe right at the beginning of the piece. Don't do that. And reserve it for here. And here. And there. So maybe across 3 lines, 10 bars, we'll have used it 3 times. We'll have used that mechanism 3 times. The other times, striving to play more straight, more across the bar line, across the beat, to the downbeat of the next one, right? Instead of it being less musical, right? Even though we feel like, especially after you've practiced this a lot, and that kind of rubato and that movement, that gesture, you might feel like your first few times through, that it's less expressive. And it's not less expressive. Playing straighter isn't less expressive as long as we're still doing something interesting with our phrase and our dynamic, right? So don't let that dissuade you from trying this out and implementing it in a broad sense of your interpretation. Okay. Let's go through a couple more details, just about a couple phrases. Rotzi, I will get to your question in just a second. Okay. So looking at measure 12, you'll see some of the notes I've written here. This is 11 into 12. So I applaud you for paying attention to the rubato mark. It's not a dynamic crescendo. That is a push forward. But be careful that we don't go too far, that we observe it with a little more moderation again. Yes? So we can feel a little bit of a push, yes? But it's not so much that we just kind of fall into the next phrase. I think that pulls us out of the emotion that we really like throughout the whole piece. Also in this measure, I love this about some of the great Chopin editions. You can really see the difference, that second circle I just made. That is not an accent, it's an emphasis mark. You can really see the difference in this edition, that the emphasis mark is very wide, and it's not like a little accent, which would just be that. Yes. So an emphasis mark, we can make that emphasis with dynamic, with time. It doesn't have to be just a louder note. But we really do want to hear that low C has something special going on, right? And notice the emphasis also takes place really at the beginning, or you could even consider before the rubato marking to push forward. Okay. Great. Next thing, Quentin. This is a similar thing. Yes, Quentin. Yeah, depending on your score. That's the thing. There are accent marks in Chopin, and they are all over the place. But there is a difference between those, between an accent and an emphasis mark. Okay, diving into the next line. The stretto. I know in your email you said that you felt like you rushed it. I agree. Let's first talk about the turn. So that turn is right here. Okay. What you played, Quentin, was a turn that filled the entire duration of the quarter notes. almost like a quintuplet. That's a great choice. You can also consider putting the entire turn with that eighth note. I like doing that in my interpretation because I feel like it really lets me expand the tempo forward, pushing that turn later. Yes? Okay. So that could be something that, first of all, helps you to feel a great push forward if you change the placement of that. You don't have to, though. Secondly, does everybody know what stretto means? Yes, Nancy, I'm seeing your comment now. Seymour Bernstein, yes, he talks in depth about the piece. And it's not just the hairpins in this, but hairpins all over Chopin and all over Brahms as well. They are marks of rubato. Bedlington Grimmer says no. Quentin, you can answer this question. What does stretto mean? We'll see if anybody else chimes in. To tighten up. Not the best answer, Quentin. But I think I understand why you said that. Antonio says narrow. Interesting. Antonio, is that a very literal translation? Because I can exactly see how that ties into the musical definition. Zen of Zen says almost rushing. Okay, stretto alters tempo. Yes. Antonio says it could be tight. It could be a tightening of emotion. Not necessarily, but never body tightening. Any other guesses? Zen of Zen so far is, I would say, the closest. But we never do want to actually rush in music. Bunny Hollow says to quicken. Yes. Okay. That would be if you looked up stretto in Harvard's Dictionary of Music or on Google, and Alexa says to pick up the pace. Yes. Those are going to be the definitions that you get. Stretto is to move more quickly, to pick up the pace. Usually it's often given at the end of like an aria in opera. So after the aria is over, the orchestra takes over during this vocalist's last big note, right? And the orchestra plays the same theme, but it's much quicker than we heard it previously. So, stretto. We do want to push forward. And it's interesting to also, we have to observe two more things. Yes, Zen of Zen, almost trying to fit the music into a shorter period of time. That's great. Yeah. And so, but going back to what Antonio said, narrowing, if we think of, I could see a narrowing of time, compressing of time. That could mean a similar thing, right? Okay, looking at the score, we need to contrast the fact that stretto is given, right, this entire time, but it's also accompanied by a rubato mark here. And that rubato mark is to get slower. So while this entire section where we have these dotted lines is faster, let's say, than the rest of the piece, Chopin does bring us back to the original tempo with the hairpin, right? Okay, that can help us make sure that we don't go too far, and that when we do return to this, what bar is this? Stuff in 16, 17, 18, and 19 at the end of the line that we're looking at, that will be more in the right context. And that return to tempo will not happen only right here. It'll happen earlier in the phrase. Right. So let me give you a little example of that. Sorry. Let me do that again, so you can actually focus on the time I'm trying to show you. Here we go. So yes, we can hear that we continue to get slower and slower. Great. The other thing you can think about, Quentin, is what I wrote right here at the end of measure 16 that you can still see more broadly, especially for the 16th note. Right? If we can feel that 16th note as something that has more length, even as a singer, stretching before the big, really big arrival, I think we're going to play that very well. Yes, vice versa, conversely, if you play it too quickly, it's going to pull us in the opposite direction of really where we want to go with that line, right? So be careful. You can, and feel free to take some time right there for that 16th note. Okay. Quentin, do you have any questions? You had a digital versus acoustic question in your email that we'll get to in a second. But I just want to know, do you have any questions about any of the other stuff that we talked about? And or does anybody else have any questions? Absolutely, throw them in the chat. Quentin, while you write that, just to kind of sum everything up, I think your technique and your interpretation are they're on a great path. So I think these are all fairly small details to think about, starting with the technique, right, to allow us that much more control. The more control we have over the left hand, the more choices we have about how we want to shape the right hand. And then just paying maybe a little bit more attention to the shape of not just one note to the next, but how all of those two note figures, how they all fit together. Bethany, you said you don't think you've seen eighth notes beamed together with a triplet. Yes. I see what you mean. Bethany is talking about this right here, where we have two eighth notes at the beginning of the beat and then a triplet. Some editions of Chopin, I've seen that happen. Typically, and in most modern notation, that beam would be broken. They might not do that for even a new edition of Chopin, because I bet this is directly from his manuscript where he beamed everything together. No change in interpretation, though, based on those two things. Breaking the beam or not breaking the beam. Okay. Okay, great. Quentin, I know in the video you sent, the last two bars, they were a little bit loud. You said they're getting more under control. If you're rolling them to practice playing those chords softly, take more time to roll them so we can really feel how soft they are. So that easiest fix, if arpeggiating and rolling a chord like that is difficult for you, the easiest way to fix that, just go slowly and let the wrist move. And then we will try. That first chord is, I think, the hardest one because of how spread the right hand is. It's hard to play that softly because of that gap right there between second and third finger. Even if you play it with 4, then the gap shifts between 4 and 5. They're both difficult. Yes. So Quentin, as you continue to practice this, and you are rolling the chord, just think about rolling it extra slowly. I think that'll be great for your practice, and it'll help get your ear tuned into also the dynamic that you truly want, and I think you'll be happier with it too. Nancy, great question. What does smorzando mean? We'll open that up to the chat also. What does smorzando mean? Antonio says attenuate. Antonio. Always there. Love it. Let's, any others? Attenuate is great. Attenuate to the point of, Quentin, yes, Quentin, perfectly, dying away. And so attenuating to the point basically of nothing. Or dying away to the point of nothing. Yes. Great question, Nancy. Yeah. Bunny, I'm going to come back to your question. Bunny. Quentin, I wanted to mention one more thing before we wrap up this segment and move on to the next one. And that is, if you can, you may have heard this on the channel before, but if you can tie a story, an emotion, a scene to your phrase, you're going to have, I think, an even better time. You're going to show us a more musical and artistic interpretation of how all these notes string together than if you only think about the dynamic. This one's a little louder, this one's a little softer, right? This one's much louder, this one's much softer, and how we link those together with legato. That's a good starting place, and that's where we started today when we were talking about those first phrases and all of the size, right? But if you can tie something much deeper, either to the whole piece and or to every single phrase that we have, then I think just instantly what you want to play is going to have so much more meaning. Seth says, what do you recommend for coming up with the story? First, your own experiences. If you have experiences you can tie to, like, what is this piece about? We know, for example, Chopin requested it to be played at his own funeral. I believe, we all know also Chopin hated titles, but someone, I think, in Chopin's presence told him it sounded like tears in the basement of the mausoleum. I think I'm getting that right. Sadness, right? A whole lot of sadness. Yes, Nancy, that's right. And so, okay, can we take that big idea of what sadness is, and can we add our own story to that? Is there something we've personally experienced that we can relate to, and how we felt in those moments? Because if we have that, we know all of the variations and the minute changes in emotion that we went through as we experienced something. And a lot of times that's what composers pull on when they write pieces of music to begin with. So if we have that personal experience and we can tie that, hopefully, you know what? The harder it is and the deeper it is, the better it's going to come out in your music. I know that can be a difficult thing to talk about, but really the better for our interpretation. Secondly, if you don't have something like that, or if you don't want to go into something like that, can you think of a scene from a movie that you would put this piece of music to? Is there something that sticks out? Can you find, maybe look up scenes where this piece was used and get a sense of the overall emotion of that scene? What's happening? You can use that in your own interpretation as well. Seth, so those are two places that I'd recommend going. If you can do it with your own experiences, great. If you can reference a film, great. Thirdly, if you have a lot of practice with this, if you can create your own scene with your own fictional or real character and painting your own picture, telling your own story, that kind of is combining both of those elements in our own unique, creative way. Okay. Quentin. Let's give Quentin one more round of applause. And we're gonna move on to one of Quentin's questions. Can all of you hear the barking dog? Is that all over the stream, or is it only me that can hear that? Thanks for all the applause, everybody. Wonderful. Okay. Alexis says, yes, we can hear. Quick story. Well, Warren, welcome, Warren. The quick story, we just had a doggy door put in outside, and one of my dogs left in the middle of talking about that segment, and I don't think she knows how to get back in. So give me just a second. I'm going to let her in before we move on to the next thing. And I still have one more question to answer for Quentin, which is going to lead us to a little bit of an email that Antonio sent me about some tech stuff. Then we're going to dive in and hear Bethany play. Give me just a second. Oh, goodness. Okay. I think everybody stayed. Okay. Yes, Antonio, the dog was part of Chopin's funeral. Okay, the last question that Quentin had was about the difference in playing a keyboard, a digital keyboard versus an acoustic. And he said that in his experience, he's had a lot more trouble playing Rigby. He's had a lot more trouble playing very quietly on acoustic instruments than on digital instruments. And that, he said, for example, like this piece would have had a huge amount of trouble keeping all those left-hand chords quiet on some of the acoustics he's familiar with versus the digital that he played on. First of all, have other people had that experience where if you're playing both types of instruments, you have a digital and you have access to acoustics, your own or elsewhere, do you find that one over the other is easier to control? And is it consistently one over the other? Like, is it consistently digital is easier to control than acoustic? What are your experiences with that? And yes, I think she went upstairs, but she's much happier. She went outside while we were on our stream, and then she couldn't figure out how to get back in. Bethany, you say absolutely yes. And which direction does it go for you, Bethany? Nathaniel says, acoustic with the pedal down has less resistance. It's harder to play softly. Bunny says, the opposite. Acoustics are way easier. Alexis, acoustics, you can have greater control of how soft or loud, but your digital is more limited. Seth, thanks. Bachward's Fellow, hello, Bachward's Fellow, says this key is to set digitals to set the key touch and the volume settings. Sure. Phase, yes, this is my new place. I was going to mention something at the beginning of the stream, but I didn't. I'm kind of finally done with my project of building acoustic paneling, which is now all on the wall behind me. Bethany, you said digital is easier to control. Both grands you have a much lighter action, and the volume is difficult. Yeah. Buckwood's Fellow, I'm going to add to the setting key touch on a digital to make it a little bit more enjoyable to play or easier to play. And that is the fact that different actions on digitals they can be, let's say, they can have differences. They might not be as great of differences as you'll find on many different acoustic pianos, but the actions are still different. And Alexis, you like the sound and tone of grands more than digital. Yeah. Yeah, and digitals can be really wonderful too. Really, really wonderful. Digitals from different brands can have some very unique characteristics. So Quentin was playing on a Yamaha. I think it was probably one of the Clavinovas. I know some of the people here have Yamaha Clavinovas. Others of you I know have different digitals, different brands, right? You could blindfold me and sit me down at a Clavinova, and I could tell you that it was a Clavinova, not by how it sounds, but by how it feels, by how the keys feel when they go down. It's very unique to that brand. I could tell you what a Kawai digital feels like. I could tell you what a Nord digital feels like, because they're all different. Gosh, even if there was no sound and you just asked me to play, I could tell you the difference. You might find, Quentin, especially if you have different digitals you play on, some of those you might find easier to control than others. Sticking with just digitals, I find Yamaha digitals by far the most difficult to control playing softly. That's my preference. But I find that all the digital brands, they have a bit of resistance at the top of the key that I just personally don't love. So I don't own one from that brand. They're still all great. They're all great, and there are lots of people that really like them. But my personal preference. And Zen of Zen, that's right. Digitals and the idea of let off. Let off is a mechanical it's mechanical stuff that happens inside the piano, let's say. The ones that have let off are going to feel more realistic. Yes. The ones that have a grand action where there's actually wood and pieces inside that mimic the weight and how everything moves inside a grand piano, they're going to feel more realistic. But there's still going to be that difference in how heavy the keys feel, regardless of the sound that comes out. And it's interesting, I think it was Bethany. Bethany, you said, yeah, your dad is a piano technician. Okay. One thing that piano technicians will commonly tell you is that sometimes people will complain that an action is too light when actually the hammers are too hard inside the piano. Because the hammers are hard, it takes less effort to get a bright, loud tone out of a piano. But actually, the action might be perfectly regulated. They might not need any adjustments, but the hammers need adjusting. So there can be a lot of different ways we experience those feelings of control and dynamic and how they all relate. Overall, yeah, Bachwart's fellow, I agree with what you just said. You have to use your ears and some kinesthetic memory so that you calibrate a touch response that you like, especially one that matches your instrument, the one that you have all the time to play on. Okay. Let's sum up, first of all, digitals. Even though there are differences, they are across the board going to be more consistent, and they aren't going to show the wear that any acoustic instrument shows over time. Even if it's not even played, over time, wood dries out. Depending on the climate you're in, for a long time, I've lived in a very dry climate. So it's always, I have a humidifier on the piano. I always have to worry about the wood drying out. I have to worry about the hammers drying out and brightening. Yeah. But even if it wasn't played, that stuff can all change just over time with an acoustic instrument. There's also okay, so let me just say that one more time. Digitals, I think, are going to be very consistent, even across brands, even though there are some differences in feel. I think overall you'll find that what you get, you can count on from brand to brand, and it's not going to change over time. Okay, great. Now, are acoustic instruments really more difficult to play softly than digitals? I would say that because of the technology that we have, and especially a lot of the new digital keyboards, the action you get and the tonal quality you get is closer to being on par with a really, really well-maintained concert grand than it's going to be for your average upright or your average baby grand piano. So that's part of the reason why digitals sell so incredibly well. You really get a great experience playing on them, and they don't need to be maintained really, right? So, in my experience, if I have a concert grand to play on and it's beautiful, I'm going to have a way easier time playing softly and showing a great range of dynamics. Going back to, I think, what Alexis said, the breadth and the breadth of dynamics I can show on a concert grand are going to be so much more massive, from far quieter to far louder on that instrument than on any digital I'm ever going to touch. As you go, let's say, lower in quality, like how many of you have a concert grand at home? Maybe some of you do. I don't have one at home. I would love to. But if you don't have access to that, then it's either you either aren't going to, or it's a real treat when you get to play one, and it's just like, wow, this is amazing. The last time I went, I played on a Steinway, a Hamburg D. It was like, of course, I practiced hard for the performance. Everything was going well, but when I sat down for rehearsal, before the doors opened, it was like, it felt like I couldn't play a wrong note because the piano was so perfect. Whereas at home, it would be like, oh, struggling to get that phrase just perfect, and this one, and the nuance, and everything. And then you sit down at such a beautiful instrument, and it's like the angels sing. Okay, so as we step down from instruments like that into stuff that is more readily available everywhere, in homes, at churches, at schools, in typical auditoriums, especially if they're not often used to host classical concerts, classical piano concerts, you're going to find medium-sized grands and baby grands. And in rehearsal spaces, you'll find uprights. And at home, you'll find uprights, right? If you have an acoustic piano that you have meticulously maintained, you can approximate that consistency of playing on a digital and the ease of that. I mean, meticulous, I mean like your technician is out once or twice a month to work on it, not the typical, twice a year that piano manufacturers always recommend, but all the time. That would put it on par with how often, or almost as how often a concert piano gets worked on. Concert instruments get worked on, regulated, voiced, tuned every single day, sometimes more than once a day. So they should be flawless to play, right? If we start to approximate that with acoustic pianos at home, we're going to get a similar response. How many people want to spend that sort of money? Not very many. I'm closer to that than all my friends that I know, in that I usually have my tech over about once a month over the course of the year. But that's not common. And then, yes, this will be the last thing about this. What Bachward's fellow just said, Yamaha grands are generally brighter. Yamaha products in general, acoustic products, are generally brighter. They're brighter than most brands. Even when they've been well-voiced, well-regulated, when they're working exactly how they're supposed to, they're generally brighter instruments. That makes that brand more difficult to control playing softly. And that's just how that brand is designed. And there's nothing that's going to change that. So all of that, those are up to your personal preferences. A lot of people like Yamaha acoustics because of that. A lot of people don't, because of the same reason. That's a personal choice. Okay, let's put a bow on this long topic. Are digitals easier to control? If you don't have access to I would say a really premium acoustic piano, Most often, the answer is going to be yes. Digitals are easier to control. Let's leave that there. Okay. Bethany, your question. Mechanically, what makes it difficult to play quietly? Like when pressing the key lightly, it makes no sound. Right. So on an acoustic, upright or grand, we have to generate enough momentum to throw the hammer. We'll just talk about a grand. That's how the piano design first originated, right? So we have to generate enough momentum. There's a piece called the jack inside the piano, and the jack throws the hammer. The hammer doesn't stay in contact with it. The jack is this little like point under the hammer shank, actually toward this side. And when you press the key, a lot else happens, but as you press the key, the jack goes up. If you press the key very slowly, the jack goes up and the hammer never leaves contact with it, right? So as we press the key more firmly or more quickly, the jack throws the hammer into the string, and then the hammer rebounds and falls back, right? That's approximated on digitals, where new good digitals, if you press the key very slowly, softly, you won't get a sound. The mechanism is a little different in there. So we have to generate that momentum, right? Now, the harder the hammer is, this is what I've typically found, and Bachward's fellow may have just partly summed this up. Harder and compacted felts are bright, harder to play softly, and you can use the soft pedal a little bit. Thanks, Quentin. Thanks for being here. So even if you reach the minimum velocity that we can throw the hammer off the jack, if the hammers are hard and the felt is compacted, it's going to produce a bright and a louder tone. And there is nothing we can change about that. The only thing we can change is our choice in how we perceive it, if we can even make that happen. So can we choose on a piano where playing this like this gives us a tone like this? Can we choose to recalibrate our ears and our mind to say that that's now pianissimo, and there's nothing we can do to make it softer? I have to accept that that's pianissimo and then build our interpretation from there. The good news is that hopefully it'll feel similar to what we're used to playing at home. We still want to use about the same amounts of effort and the speed of the depression of the key as we practice. And we need our ear, we need to tell our ear, this is okay, it's good, it is what I intend, it's different than what I've heard while I practice, but it's okay. And if we can recalibrate ourselves to that, concert pianists, let's say the variation in quality of instrument that you get is not so great. But there are definitely times you'll have to play on a bright piano. And you just have to accept that a true whisper quiet pianissimo is not possible for the instrument. And it's no fault of yours as the performer. And we adjust our performance and just play from there. Okay. Oh, okay. That leads me into, I wanted to talk about Antonio, what Antonio emailed me. Gel Zorro, I will come back to this because, oh gosh, we have so much to get to. I know there were some other questions up further in the chat too. Hopefully we will have time at the end of the stream to talk about those. Antonio had sent me a question about mixing VST. So VST is a virtual instrument. And I wanted to talk about it here because we were just talking about tech stuff, digital keyboards and key weight and that kind of stuff. Antonio, I'm going to give you a relatively quick answer, and it's going to be general. Antonio was trying out a new virtual piano library. I think it was made by some of the students at Princeton. I think that's right. And they were sampling a Steinway D in their concert hall. And in the sampling process, they put microphones up all over the place. I think the information you sent said there were 9 microphone perspectives. Think of that as like 9 different places that you could be sitting, maybe, or standing in the hall where the piano was while they did all this recording of one note at a time. Okay, so how do you choose what microphone perspectives to use? Because you can use more than one at a time. Antonio, my answer for you today is that we want to choose 2 or 3 perspectives that can first of all, can work in conjunction with one another. So, for example, there are many libraries that you get a pianist, the bench perspective. And so microphones will be suspended like above the pianist while they record the instrument for the library. And it's supposed to replicate what you hear on the bench. I never really find that it sounds truly like what it sounds like on the bench. But that's a perspective. The microphones are here. They're out here. Sometimes they're behind the pianist even and up high. I would never choose to mix that perspective with something that is out in the hall or a perspective that is around the crook of the piano, down that way and down toward the tail. Because it's just not going to match. And if we just think about that without even having experience of being an engineer and doing this, just think about that. The sound we perceive here is maybe the most far removed from what the audience experiences out in the hall. I would second that by the sound that comes out of the tail, the very end, is the second most removed from what the audience experiences. And so I'd have a hard time choosing one of those positions and mixing it with anything else. But let's say there's a microphone perspective that is at the crook of the piano, just outside the lid. I hope you can all visualize this with me. Just outside the lid. So it would be like if you were standing 1 foot away from the piano, like looking into the lid as it's open. That's what it would sound like. I would choose to mix that with something that is 10 feet away, pointed in the same place. Yes? Antonio, you said, yeah, there's a tail perspective. Yeah. And the tail perspective is always darker. The sound that comes off the end of the soundboard, it has fewer of the high overtones, and you get more response from the bass strings. Sometimes, if you're recording a really bright instrument, you will choose to mic it off the tail because you'll get a more balanced sound than if you mic it somewhere else. That's a little bit of a different conversation. Here's another idea, Antonio. I know this isn't a part of the library you're working on, but it's a little anecdote that I can share from personal experience. One of my favorite piano recordings that I engineered, I was working it was about a 550 seat hall, and there was a Hamburg D on the stage. And I put up 3 pairs of microphones. I put up a pair about, let's say, 2 to 3 feet outside the lid, another pair about 8 feet outside the lid, and another 5 feet in the air. And the third pair I put almost all the way in the back of the hall, in the aisles, pointed up and toward the back corners of the hall. And when it came time to mix all of that together, I primarily used the middle set of microphones, the ones that had some distance, seconded by the set that was way, way in the back of the hall. And I have never since made a live piano recording that had that sense of depth and space. I was really proud of that. And it was given mostly by mics that you would have never thought to put there. The mics captured the sound off the back of the room, off the back wall. And that was the point. I wanted it to all be just the natural sound of the room. And it was far away, 70 feet away from the instrument, because it was a pretty big hall. If Yes, yes. Not only that, Antonio, he said good pianists play the hall, but even if it wasn't a great pianist, there would still be sound hitting the back wall and coming back, right? And we'd still be able to get something similar. So if you have a perspective like that, this is also why even on a sample library, you can add reverb. And I treat the reverb like that, like it's that sound coming off the back wall where it's not mixed really heavily, really high, just a little bit to give some that really extra width and that depth of sound. And I think you'd enjoy that because of the types of recordings that you like. I tend not to, Antonio, mix really close mics with anything more distant because it just doesn't sound real anymore. And the easiest thing, if you can imagine your head where the microphones are, if you can imagine your ears where the microphones are, and you have your ears over the soundboard under the lid of the piano, and you try to add something 10 feet away, it just sounds strange. It doesn't sound real anymore. Last thing, Antonio, you probably already know this, but most classical recordings are mic'd very distantly. So the closest mics are usually 5 to 10 feet away from the instrument, and the furthest can be much further than that. And so if you want to approximate that sound with the library, you need a perspective that is that far away, 5 to 10 feet away from the instrument. Everything that you listen to by Deutsche Grammophon is recorded way far away from the instrument. It dulls the transient, the punch of the attack. Really, it helps make pianists sound even greater because you don't get all of that percussiveness that happens within a couple foot radius of the instrument. It happens for everybody. And if you stuck your head inside the piano listening to whoever your favorite pianist is, it would sound really harsh and really percussive because that's how the piano works. Whereas if you listen to jazz and you listen to pop music, you'll always find that they use microphones that are inside the lid, very, very, very close because they want that. You say, would it make sense to have different distances in a single line? If you have that choice, yes. I don't know in a library if you would have that choice. But if I were in a space engineering a session, yes. Everything I would walk around the piano, and hopefully they did this as they were making the library. There's a spot when you walk around the lid where the sound comes together and it sounds really nice. So your pianist is playing, you walk around the piano, you find that point, and it's a three-dimensional point. So there is height, how it bisects the lid, the rim and the lid, right? There's a height component, and there's a left-right component of how far off the crook of the piano we are or toward the tail. And usually it's somewhere like 50%. It's close to 50%. So I always start there and I move back and forth. And then I follow that line out into the hall. Or we could even turn the piano a little bit so that that line projects straight out to the back wall. That's how I like to do it. Okay, Antonio, I hope that helps. I want to get back to piano. Not that that wasn't piano, but all the tech stuff. I love tech stuff. I could talk about it for a long time. Okay, I know. Let me. Gelzora, I can still see your question. I'll give you a quick answer, and then we're going to dive into Bethany's performance, and then hopefully we'll have time afterward to cover some more questions, general questions. Gelzora, you said you have a question about practicing 20% above performance tempo. Do you only work sections that way until you can play, or until you can play the entire piece at that speed? Oh, yeah. I would not try to work the entire piece at 20% above tempo until you can absolutely play everything in small chunks at that tempo or beyond. Then, as a great additional challenge, yes, try to play if you're working on a Chopin etude, try to play the whole thing that fast. But that is going to be one of the final steps that you take. Let's say if you're preparing to play something highly technical, right, and you're preparing to play it publicly, I would use that method maybe a week or two before the performance of really extending the tempo and making it ultra challenging, so that when the performance times comes, I can dial things back and it will feel so much easier. But that is the last step. That would be after everything else is really well put together and I can do a full run of the piece at the tempo I'd like and have it be pretty darn good at home or in the practice room. The other method, though, of using the same thing and practicing above performance tempo in small chunks, I start and I teach to start using that as soon as you possibly can in the learning process. Because as soon as we can start building that speed beyond tempo, or at least, I have a couple students right now that I've been advising to do this to help build better muscle memory, because the learning tempo has been so slow that in order to build that kinesthetic memory in the first place, the actions have to be more closely linked together. So 2 days ago, I taught one and maybe two lessons like this, where we took 2 to 4 measures of a piece, and I worked with the student on pushing that tempo, incrementally pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and it never broke, right? The notes never broke down, the rhythms never broke down, because we added gradually and because it was such a small amount. So we added tempo incrementally, we got beyond performance tempo for that short section, and then this was, maybe 200% faster than where we started the day. And then we dialed it back to performance tempo, and there was so much control. It was great. Now, you have to continue doing that in practice when your teacher's not around in order to get the great benefits across the entire piece. So I told my student that day, I hope you apply this to all of the bars in the rest of the piece. And if they do that, if they have the discipline to do that, we took about 30 minutes to go through the whole process for 4 measures. If they can do that, they're going to come back in a week or two, and it's going to be really great. And if they don't do it, because it's very difficult to keep that discipline, because it's a lot of repetition of the same stuff, we'll end up spending more time working on it together again. But the point is, we could make a massive amount of progress. And at the end of those 30 minutes, the execution simply of the notes and the rhythms, maybe, Rhodesy, the execution of those notes and rhythms it had become so much more automatic that we could have that discussion about phrase and about dynamic and about the story we want to tell. And that can never, we always try to make that happen as quickly as possible, but it's very difficult. You have to be quite advanced to think about both that and the technical execution all at one time while you're learning a piece. So Gel Zorro, hey, internet privacy. Gel Zorro, I would say absolutely use small bursts of taking things over tempo throughout all of your practice every day, lots of different segments, but reserve trying to do it for the entire piece until you're nearing a performance, because we don't want to go through, really, we don't want to do any of this if we're getting notes wrong, right? If we push to 20% over tempo and it's just a complete mess, we're not ready to do it yet. Yeah, so take some more time, practice more slowly, push the tempo to where we can still maintain 100% accuracy. And that point, we keep raising the bar of what that point is. 100% accurate is 80% tempo, then 90, then 100%, and then we go beyond. All right. Great question, Gel Zorro. Okay. Rhodesy said, does that link back to piano adrenaline? Jess, I don't think it was you, no. Rhodesy, piano adrenaline. When you get very energetic and can play like you haven't played before. Rhodesy, if we have time, I'd like to come back to talk about that, because I've experienced I think something like that in performance, which is why I don't think that being anxious or nervous is a bad thing. If you are performing, or if you're, and there are many people here are getting ready for tests, exams, RCM and ABRSM and such, or you're taking auditions or anything like that, the nervous energy is not bad. In fact, it can be the difference between a bland performance and an outstanding performance if we know how to channel it the right way. That is a whole massive talk. Alexis, a quick answer. Yes, I would use that. Yes, for the pieces like, the Fantasy Impromptu or the, Rachmaninoff Adagio. Absolutely. Yes. Casey, I remember Casey, I Googled Brian Calderson. I could not find him online. Casey, you should send me an email. My email address is in the description. Send me an email with a link because I will check it out. Because the name that kept popping up was the guy I know, Brian Culbertson. I could not find Brian Calderson. But I'd love to know who you're talking about. Okay, we have to get to Bethany. She's been so patient and waited an hour and almost 20 minutes. Thanks, Bethany. Bethany is playing my arrangement of Mission Impossible. I'm very excited to hear what she's about to do. And I think you'll all be very excited to hear it as well. Okay, let's jump over. I got to get Bethany queued up, and we're going to jump right into that. If I had a crowd going wild, I would definitely play that on the stream, Bethany. Nice work. Oh, let's give Bethany some big applause. Big applause in the chat. Really nice work. Very well-deserved comments from, Bachward's fellow Donna, Bunny, Gel Zorro, Alexis. Yeah. Yes. Really wonderful. Okay. So Bethany, we're going to do a little talk about octaves. They're not bad. They're not bad. I know you've had questions about them, but yeah. Thanks, Bethany. Oh, Faze, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Bethany. A couple technical things we're going to talk about and a couple interpretive things. But really, gosh, really good. You've got everything up to tempo. Couple places where the tempo faltered a little bit that we'll talk about, but really, really nicely played. Internet Privacy, perfectly played by a classical, did you say by a classical pianist? Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Bethany, let's dive in. Here we are with the score. There are a couple of these markings. Everything we talk about is going to be relatively small, but they're the small details that take a great performance and make it truly amazing. Okay, we have these little slurs. They almost look like ties to nothing. Here, measure 2, across the page over in measure 4. Thanks, Bunny, for being here. Those are sometimes abbreviated LV or, the original would be French, but you could just think of it as let vibrate. So that's what those ties to nowhere mean, is that actually we want this note, the G, to continue sounding into the next bar. You did the right thing with pedal because you have to take a new pedal, but that means when we get to the end of bar 2, we hold the G. So that last G of the right hand, we hold down with the finger, play the next bar with the pedal change. Right, so. Same thing happens at the end of the bar, end of the line there. Hold the F, goes to an E. So the point is to hear that blur, but have a lot more control over it than if we just left the pedal down like that whole time. Because pedal down the whole time would sound really bad. So, thank you, Gel Zorro. I'm not going to try to pronounce, but yes, my French pronunciation is horrid. But what Gel Zorro said, thank you for posting that. Okay. Let's move down the page a little bit, Bethany. Okay, getting into measure 9, we have the theme changes a little bit. You can choose to bring out those notes marked with tenuto. We don't want to take time. Sometimes in my composition and arranging, I use tenuto to mean a small accent, not to mean taking of time. You didn't take any time in your performance, but I do think you could bring out all of these tenutos a bit more. Almost, you could think of it like ringing a little bell. Everything else is a more muted texture. Yes. Good, good. Very good rest of the page. Let's go to the next page. You know, I didn't mark anything here, but we can talk about a little thing. Let's see. I'm going to change the page layout here for just a second so I can see both of these. It's going to be very small for all of you. I apologize. We'll come back to a more zoomed in setting in just a second. Leaving page 1 and going into page 2. You had a very nice arrival in bar 17. That was very nice. I think before you take to heart the poco a poco crash, we can drop the tempo. Sorry, not the tempo. We can drop the dynamic. Think about trying to drop back to something like piano. If we don't quite achieve piano, that's okay. But right. So within the poco a poco crash that eventually leads us all the way to fortissimo here, we continue to make some more little shapes. So you did a great job of driving to 17. Now drop the second beat or beat 2.5 of 17. 1.5, I guess I should say. Right. And then create a new phrase that pushes again for 2 bars. And then do the same thing. Maybe don't drop to piano, but mezzo piano. Do the same thing. Push forward for another few bars. And then drop to mezzo forte. Maybe. Let's see how that goes in a second. And then maybe from there, we just continue to crescendo linearly all the way to forte. So from the beginning of 17, we have previous page, arrival, drop. Push, arrival, drop. Push, arrival, continue. All the way, which you did a lovely job of. Also, congratulations on measure 26, Bethany. I always find, gosh, and I wrote the dang thing, but I always find articulating all 4 16th notes here to be a little tricky. So very nice job. They were crystal clear, and you gave a lovely crescendo before leading us into the main theme here. So really great. Also, you've probably gotten this from my recording, but you are perfectly allowed by me to take a little break, which you did, to set up that 16th note run. It's okay to go from the trills and have just that little bit of pause to come out of the trill and get set up for a flawless run into the downbeat of the next bar. That's very acceptable. I don't think it detracts. In fact, it almost helps to offset this from the blur of the trill that happened. So, very good. Looking down the page, Bethany, this was all really nice. My only suggestion is maybe exaggerate the slurs a bit more than you currently are. So, yes. Let's see. Internet Privacy said she needs to lay into. Yes. I'm going to come back to what Internet Privacy said, Bethany. Maybe toward the end of us working through this, because I do agree. And not the volume of the digital, but yeah, we're going to come back to that. Okay, let's continue on. So Bethany, where we were just talking about just leaning into the slurs, both for connection and also for shape. Right? I didn't write any crescendo, decrescendo, but you can really choose to exaggerate that if you'd like to. Okay. Down at the bottom of the page. This is self-explanatory. Sounded lovely. Let's keep going. And I'm going to change the page view so don't have to keep zooming in. Okay. This was all great, Bethany. So here, I marked subito piano. you did a great job. You might not quite so literally take the subito piano for the right hand part. So I'm not going to draw an arrow to the right hand. I'm going to draw it more for the left hand. The right hand will quiet some, but we still want to hear, and we want that to have a nice pop and some sparkle. And if it's too quiet, like a good classical subito piano, let me show you what that would be. That loses some of the intention that we really, really want, right? So we do want think about the crescendo is not only volume, but it's also excitement, and we're pushing forward, and it's not broadening, it's getting more and more, excited is the best word I can think of off the top of my head. Almost think about linking where you leave off here with this, so that those 2 points are closer together than not. Still a drop-in dynamic. So if the left hand really obeys the subito piano marking, we get that really dramatic shift, and that sudden dramatic shift in feel, which is really what the subito piano is going for. Yes? Okay, you say extra quietness was a little mistake. Okay, well, great. I'm glad that wasn't your intention. So, yeah, just let that speak. Then, okay, we start to get into the octaves. Bethany, these all worked pretty darn well. Without practice, you're going to outplay me on these, I think, today. Those were all good. I'm going to reserve my comments for octaves. Intense. Ah, I love it. Love it. Yes, intense. I'm going to reserve my comments about the octaves until we get into the more difficult section later, because I have the same suggestion for you, Bethany, that you can apply here and later on in the piece. So we're going to skip forward for now. Jess, gosh, I even wrote on the score intensity in the next little bit I'm going to talk about, but perfect word, Jess. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back to the score. After we leave this initial octave section, I would continue to pedal here. Let's just draw a line, because we're not going to depress the pedal there necessarily. Pedal through the first staccato. The first staccato being here, right? So, we don't have the pedal down that whole time. What you're doing through that bar is great. So from here, I should say. From there on, we can have just a slight lift. Internet privacy, some slop would help. Yeah, especially in the next section, Bethany. So here, feel free to use that staccato articulation and gradually release the pedal for the 2 staccato notes. Right. Okay. Making sense so far. I wrote intensity despite staccato there because that's really the feel we're going for. That we go all the way to the end of that line, and it doesn't stop where the slur in the right hand ends. It doesn't stop here, with the left hand being an afterthought. It goes all the way. Okay. Next section. A little solo. Okay. This goes into what Internet Privacy just said. I wrote here while we were listening to you play, start a little bit more lazily. We don't need to quite play all of the rhythms exactly how they're written. So here, is that truly an eighth note? No, it's not truly an eighth note plus 3/16. Things are free. So you have a great baseline. You have a great foundation built. And now feel free to explore around that. So that's perfect, right? And that's good. But if we let it start a little more lazily, that has a lot more character. Yes? Okay, so that's what I encourage you to do. It's difficult to explain in any sort of precise term because we're truly going for a lack of precision. Okay, and those last three triplets, I said especially here on the score. Can the left hand stay mostly in time? So this is our timekeeper. And the right hand is just really soloing. Rigby. We've got the barking dogs all over the stream today. Okay. Okay. Bethany, all making sense so far? Okay, starting at measure 54. A lot of the phrases, you're going to have more success technically and musically playing a lot of the phrases in this solo if they're all more detached, which is what I wrote here. They don't need to be as linked together. And in addition to that, you can feel free to experiment with throwing in added accents here and there. Right? How would those two bars that I just highlighted, how would they sound the way I personally like to play it? Whoops. Here is with a little accent. Da, 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 da. So, like that. So it's not all linear, right? But that's not... Yes, Internet Privacy was composed by Lalo Schifrin, yeah. But it's not, Bethany, it's not, my way isn't the only right way to do that. Those are just the ones I prefer. I like accenting those high notes on each descending figure because I think it also brings out that we have a figure of 3 and a figure of 4 and a figure of 2. They're all different and they all take different amounts of time. It helps keep the listener not prepared for what's coming next, right? But you could choose something else. You could put 2 like that. Da 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 da. Right? Your choice. Your choice. The one thing that I would not do is play everything like a nice, beautiful line. Right? And then continuing on that theme. Right? Keep it detached. And keep looking for those places to throw in little accents. More funk, you say. Yes. Internet Privacy says, drink some wine and let it rip. Yes. I like that. I like that. Okay, more funk. Vodka. Vuda. Faze, I don't know that. I thought you were saying vodka. Okay. So Bethany, I'm going to say it one more time. Probably won't be the last time. But big theme throughout the whole solo. Keep it detached. Next bars, 56, 57. All of this. Right? I think you're pretty sure you did it. Yeah, Bethany. Funny. I'm pretty sure, Bethany, you did this without pedal. If you didn't do it without pedal, absolutely no pedal through 57. Yeah, super clean. I wrote on here, focus on the release. So that if we slow that down, everything is separate. It's not. If we speed that up, that's very nice and linear, but it doesn't have that popping clarity. Right? Okay, so that's really, I said focus on release, but that's another way of saying let it be detached. These, ironically, maybe adding both of those slurs that we see in measure 60, that's not quite the best suggestion. The popcorn sound, I like that. I like that, Bethany. Yeah. So in 60, we need, especially the second one, to have some connection, I think. That accent, I think we could feel that. Maybe I'll even re-notate this as having a slur plus, let's try that a little better, slur plus a staccato on the last note. Yeah. That might be a better articulation for that part. You did a lovely job of following what I wrote, so thank you. So replicating it, Bethany. Go a little slowly in your practice. For example, in this line. And focus on letting the keys push your fingers back. So slowly enough that we can really hear that gap. But it's not a lift away. Yeah? We're not pulling the fingers back up to make that happen. We're just, the instant the note is played, we're not holding. There's no sustain. Yeah. That's what it sounds like, slow. I would have to review the video, but just a suggestion that popped into my mind. When you have accents that you'd like to bring out, whether it's the tenutos or bigger accents like we have here, do a little more throwing from your wrist to make all of that happen. So you can see how I'm really throwing, stinging the keys. Yeah, let's go to the next page. Okay. 62. First, Bethany, all of these slurs, if you're not doing this, all four of these can have a pedal, 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 very light amount of pedal, so that there's just a little bit of blur. So it's just a quick pedal down and release by the end of the third note. So we get, if I play it slowly, it's not going to have the right effect, but you'll be able to hear the pedal working. So there's a slow release. Played in tempo. I think I played some wrong notes. Yes. And then incorporate the same wrist throw on all of these. Even the left hand. It's only marked forte, I know, but these accents, that can really be like as loud as you can play. Yeah? Okay. It looked like, Bethany, you had a pretty good fingering solution for measure 64. let me give you mine that I use if you'd like to try it out, because it might help you play it with a less connected touch. I think you used a good like classical fingering. So it was played nicely. Some of this is going to be the same. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 again. I think this is where we change. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then crossing 2 over 4. Because if we instead of focusing on connecting this like a good scale, but we choose a fingering where the wrist needs to jump around, it's got a lot more jazz character versus, right, if we play a more traditional legato fingering, we're going to be inclined to stick in the keys. Like, do not, if you can change it, do not put the thumb on G. Right? Because if we understand the throwing of the hand that we have to do from here to here, we're truly going to get the whole rest of the phrase. Yeah. So Bethany, give that a try. I hope it doesn't mess you up too much, because I'm sure you've spent a lot of time practicing that slowly. Ah, I see your choice. You said 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. Yes. Okay. Okay, so that hopefully that one little change isn't too difficult. And then again, focus on detached. One more technical thing, maybe. And we could apply this to a whole lot of music. I usually wouldn't bring this up for this style, but I think it works. Instead of everything being a nice, firm down and straight 90-degree down press of the keys, right? You say you found a wrong note in a different run. Oh shoot. So instead of just a down press, can you do little swipes? So the swipes are almost approximating like how you would play French Impressionist music. I don't know if you can see that, but that there's kind of this motion happening. Because if we do that, and the wrist is steady, that release happens instantly. Normally, I would teach this attack playing, some Debussy chords. Little faux sunken cathedral that you'd play with that pulling motion. So this is a variation on that. So similar idea, pulling the fingers toward you a little bit to get that release. Okay. Moving on. Yeah. Same thing. You can apply it to the next phrases. I won't make as big of a deal about it. Still work on detached. Wrist throw. Here we are. Okay, and we've arrived to the octave section. So for all of the octaves here, Bethany, coming up, and you can apply this to the beginning as well. Two components. First, when you're playing, for the sake of not hitting any wrong notes, I'm seeing your second, third, and fourth fingers go up in the air. And so 1 and 5 are playing, but 2, 3, 4 are kind of every time we play with 1 and 5, 2, 3, 4 stick up. That's a lot of motion for a section that's so fast. We need to feel like we just shake the octaves out. So I am trying to not hit any notes in the middle with 2, 3, and 4, of course. But I'm not as actively pulling them up like that. They're still thrown a little bit out of the way, but it's not as big of a raise. Yeah? That's the first thing. Secondly, of all of the, I know you've watched my octave video, Bethany. I can see you've done a lot of good practice on these. They're well played. I think to kick it up that last notch, we need a little bit more activity from the bridge down. So if your wrist is totally steady, can you play these octaves? It's going to have to be very slow. Can you play them just by extending the fingers without the wrist movement? And it's that movement that if we can incorporate a little bit more of that, we're going to get more sting on all of those without it needing to come from the wrist, like doing this, like we talked about for those single note accents. Maybe we can incorporate a little bit from the wrist, but we're going to get more if we just have a little bit of that extra finger activity for all of these. So take a little bit of time, do some slow practice, and this is totally different practice than what you need to do with the wrist circles to play it in tempo and all of that. But we're looking for just a little bit more bite on all of them. And they're so fast, and the arm has to do so much to carry us around. Let me see if I can play from... Right? There's so much else that the arm has to do. We want that little bit extra to come just from the fingertips, if we can. You can go back, Bethany, and you can apply that. Yes. Back here, the first theme. A little bit more finger activity, right? Okay. Really, these are small things, Bethany. You played it very well. Okay, we're nearly to the end. Okay, this is the bottom of that page with all of those octaves we just talked through. We have... yes, Bethany, okay, I see. You noticed 2, 3, 4 in the video? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Bethany, this spot, measure 91, this is the one spot in the piece where I remember us losing a little bit of that energy. So the energy that we had built through all of this, the tempo fell a little bit. Right. And then it got a bit slow. I think you picked it back up again. But if we can really keep that... just keep that rotation going in the left hand. Yeah, keep that rotation going so that this is just a piece of cake to play. Feeling all of the impetus for the phrase on the accents. Yeah. Next little bit, very small note. To help you with this single finger repeated articulation. Now notice how little movement I'm doing to execute that. What I saw you doing was something more like this. I think it was like this. It was a bigger movement. Can we minimize that movement? And then, obviously, easier said than done, but same thing in the left hand. Good. Otherwise, let's go. Yeah. Okay. One final note before we wrap up. Very end of the piece. We've got these big fortissimo chords. Great job of separating them, by the way. Really good. I would much rather have that than those pedaled together. So nice job separating that. And here, can you think about crescendoing this? And again, giving this one a big sting. So great place to incorporate that extra finger activity that you worked on. For all of your other octaves, this one will be way easier to execute. So nice accent. And then very last line, again, more detached. Don't worry about it being legato. Don't worry about connecting it. It's so fast. How lightly can you play it and incorporate that swiping motion till our very end? Whew. That was some good stuff. Bethany, I hope this helps you take the piece from what's already really, really nice, really great, and just give it that extra bump to be really exciting. Going back to what Internet Privacy said, I know, Bethany, I know. Going back to what Internet Privacy said about the excitement, if you can nudge the tempo just a hair, like 5 beats per minute, I think that will make a big difference in the perceived intensity and excitement that we get. Sometimes that can be hard to do when things are already so fast, but that tiny little, putting that little edge on it, and also knowing, we talked a lot in the solo bit. We talked a little bit about being lazier. Yes, Bethany. Yeah, 95. I would say for sure you're at 95%. So in the solo, we talked about being a little bit lazier, right? And not playing the rhythms so precisely and letting them fall where they may when appropriate. Lazy, obviously, meaning like things don't move as fast or things are a little late. We're a little behind the beat. Internet Privacy can probably attest to this, but the beat, we don't often talk about this in classical music, but the beat has different parts. We usually talk about the beat being an instant in time. For most classical musicians, it is just that instant in time. But especially in jazz, the beat has a front side, it has a middle, and it has a back. And if we can learn where those are, and that there aren't 3 segments, this is a fluid continuum, right? The middle of the beat is useful in certain phrases. The front of the beat is useful in certain phrases when we want to create that added intensity and that added excitement, the front of the beat can be great. And the back of the beat is great. Yes, so Bethany says, in choir, you talk about being at the front of the beat. That is probably because for a lot of singers, it takes time. When you think you're starting the phrase as a singer, when you actually start comes after, because it takes time for air to move. So that's great that you have this experience of feeling like things get going in front of the beat, because what actually happens, the sound that actually happens, I bet, and the reason, are you the director or are you a singer? Because whether it's you or the director saying it, the reason is that they want things to happen on the beat and together. Whereas if you breathe and you start on the beat, what's actually going to come out is going to be behind. And in those cases, behind often sounds messy, sloppy, and not in a good way. You're both at various times. Great. So yeah, you're trying to not be sloppy and have things be nicely articulated by a large ensemble. So when you start your activity, the movement in the body to cue that, right, is always ahead of time. The piano is a much more responsive instrument than the voice. Things happen very instantly, and our preparation and our attacks are very quick. The breath isn't, right? Internet Privacy said, a good jazz pianist can pull against the time. Yeah, where it feels like, it's hard to describe. It feels so easy and laid back and just pleasant to listen to, but it's not out of time, but it's definitely on the back of the beat. I play bass guitar, and I've played done a little bit of studio work as a bass guitarist. I don't talk about that on the channel often, but that's another time. Like, the bass guitar is one of those instruments in a mix, regardless of ensemble. You never want it in front of the beat, ever, ever, ever. And a lot of bass players that aren't super experienced tend to rush, because, let's face it, you don't always have a whole lot to do. If you're playing the root or something and you play 4 quarter notes, well, we move positions, we get to the next note, and then if you're early, it ruins everything. And it's always better to be on the beat or just a hair behind the beat. So, yeah, Bethany, it's very hard to do everything that we're talking about, and hearing and feeling those. The best thing you can do, listen to some great jazz pianists. Listen to some great jazz pianists play, especially if you can find some, and Internet Privacy might be able to put a link or two here, because he's very versed in the jazz world, of listening to pianists play and be pulling back. Yeah, pull. Yeah, she said, just pull on it. Yeah. Bethany, I love Bill Evans. Internet Privacy said Bobby Timmons. Yeah. That is, yeah. Oh, who were we talking about? If Antonio's here, who were we talking about last 2 weeks ago with the jazz pianist? B.G. Adair. She had a lovely grasp. She wasn't doing too much pulling, but it was still on the back end of the beat. Okay, really great stuff. I know that, I think we gave Bethany a second round of applause, but just one more time. Really, really nice work. And I hope everything we talked about helps you, Bethany, take that last 5%, and is also helpful to others who are here for the stream today. Rhodesy said, well done. Yes. Rhodesy, I see you said you'll be improvising on your stream, so feel free to say hello and listen. Everybody can go do that if you'd like to. Say hello and listen to Rhodesy do some improv if you're so inclined. I am going to have to run as soon as we're done, which is going to have to be like probably now. I'm a little bit over time that I intended anyway. Antonio says Bethany rocks. I second that. Absolutely. Thanks, Bethany. I appreciate that. Okay. We are going to wrap up. I know that there were a lot of questions I did not get to today, and I'm sorry for those people. If you would like, we're going to have another stream in 2 weeks. There will be one masterclass segment that I already know about. I will make sure that we get to more of those questions. And in the meantime, if there's something that is really pressing, like you've got a performance coming up, feel free to send me an email. I'd love to help in any way that I can. And let's see, Alexis. I think I saw Alexis recently. Yeah, Alexis with some applause. Alexis, you had some questions before about Mendelssohn's Rondo Capriccioso, right? A month ago, I started actually looking at the piece and learning it on my own. And I would love to talk to you about your questions about the octaves at the end. And maybe we can make that a next time thing also. Woo! Okay. Good times. All right. For those of you that weren't here at the beginning, I do have a new album coming out this Friday. There was a link to pre-save it in the description below. If you would do that, I'd be grateful. It's all classical transcriptions. If you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button for this video. It helps out. Believe it or not, it really does. And practice smarter, not harder. I will see hopefully all of you in 2 weeks on the next stream here on Pianist Academy. Okay, everybody, have a great week. Keep practicing. Keep up all of your good work. And I'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care, everybody.